Hello, and welcome to the Effects Corner, a podcast about visual effects. I'm your host, Scott Squires. As always, if you have any questions or comments, you can submit them to the Effects Corner blog at effectscorner.blogspot.com. Just a note, for those who download the podcast, I occasionally publish text and other information at the website. There's also a store with recommended books and crew gear if you're interested. Today I'll be talking about rotoscoping, or roto for short. Rotoscoping is the tracing of moving images. It also tends to refer to live-action images as references. Rotoscoping was first developed by Max Fleischer in 1914 for the Out of the Inkwell animation series he did. This made lifelike animation quicker and more feasible. Disney's Snow White also used rotoscoping for reference purposes. Rotoscoping can be used for both animation and visual effects. In the days before digital effects, an animation camera could also be used as a type of projector. A light was placed inside the camera, and the film was projected down onto an animation table. These images then were traced by hand onto animation paper. Afterwards, the animation paper was painted in, or was traced onto an animation cell and painted in detail on the acetate. For Roger Avid, I worked with others to develop a photo-roto system. Photographic paper was punched with animation holes and placed in darkness under an animation camera. The image was exposed with the light inside the camera onto the photo paper, along with an image of an LED frame counter. Once these were processed, the animator could use this as a reference to know where to place the animated characters. Using live action as a reference can also be done in many 3D animation programs. The live action images are loaded, and the 3D image is overlaid and moved by the animator frame by frame, or at least onto keyframes. I'll cover the animation process first. All the examples I'll be showing today for both Paint Roto and for Spline Roto were done in Commotion. For animation purposes, this can be done very accurately and very detailed, or can be done very loosely, as I've done here. This same technique has been used in Waking Life and some music videos and commercials. The same process can be done in Flash tools. Okay, so here we're going to take a look at an example of tracing for animation purposes. So we can go ahead and just start tracing the key areas of the actor in this case, or whatever your reference are. Here I'm just going to go ahead and trace with the 3 pixel brush and just do a rough job here so you can get an idea of what's going on. I'm not following super close here. Just moving through here. And exactly how detailed the images are and exactly how much jitter is allowed is fully a creative call. One of the things I could do to make the process a little bit easier is to reduce the opacity of this background clip that I'm tracing, just to make it easier to see exactly where I'm making my changes and so forth. So as mentioned, I'm just tracing around here, trying to get a certain flow or look to it. So and now let's zoom in and take a look at that. And normally when I do this type of work, I blow up the image so that I can make sure I'm doing at least a reasonable job of it. In this case, since it's an animation style call, I've got a lot of flexibility in terms of the actual detail and so forth. If this were for something like a matte, which I'll be covering a little bit later, then it would become much more critical to have this match precisely what I need to do. because any fluctuations in a mat will definitely call attention to itself. And then I can choose to put in as much or as little detail as I wish to, just to get the look. Normally, if you're doing continuous animation, you want to go ahead and try to follow the same procedures on each and every frame. Otherwise, you'll be seeing pops and so forth. Alright, so now here we've got a frame drawn. And now I should be able to turn on and off my background, see how that's looking. Maybe do a little bit of touch up here and there, but by and large, that's the style and degree. I could have traced every single fold in them. The other thing is, obviously, I can go ahead and paint and actually colorize him. And once again, I can go through this. Normally I would do this on another layer with another layer so I could control it. And likewise I would do it after I've completed the entire process itself. And then that way I get a certain look from the hand painted look. But likewise I could go through with the paint bucket tool and then just go ahead and paint them in with a solid color using the cartoon fill function. Now let's take a look at some of the examples. Let's suppose that we're shooting an actor or an object and we want to place them against an entirely different background that it wasn't possible to actually shoot them against to begin with. That could be something like this, which is just a space background. It could be CG, could be all miniature, or just some other live action type of location, like in San Francisco. So the way we'd approach this is to probably shoot green screen or blue screen, such as this, and then that would allow us to automatically extract the entire actor. And in this case, if you've seen, we can place them into a different scene. And in fact, if I went ahead and shrunk them down, I could go ahead and place them here in the background. Just to give you an idea of areas walking across the street there. So that works fine, but the reality is when you're doing green screen, you typically end up with something like this when you're shooting. So here you can see we've got our main actor, but unfortunately we have a darker floor. So we may find that we have to key this with different settings than we need to key the rest of the actor, because there might be some more edging going on or some other problems down here. Likewise, if you have an actress with long blonde hair or something, they may require a different setting than the rest of your key. Obviously we have some debris or some other type of thing in the frame, because it's frequent that your green screens or blue screens don't occupy the entire frame, or that there's other things to be removed. We have some targets, some tracking targets to remove, as well as maybe we have a stunt person or grip or somebody else holding something. So all of these things have to be removed. So the way that we could go ahead and remove the rest of this garbage is creating what we call a garbage mat. And this is a form of rotoscoping. You can see I'm just creating a rough outline around our actor and getting rid of some of the other things outside here. So this is just a fairly simple mat. We could move that along or animate it to match, and it's called a garbage mat because obviously it gets rid of all the different garbage that we see around. And even in a lot of editing programs, they will have a 4-point or an 8-point garbage matting type of tool to do this type of work. And that works fine as long as you don't need something super accurate to do. So this is once again a form of rotoscoping. Okay, so now that we've discussed how to do blue screen or green screen keying to get an actor or object against a totally different background, and I've also stepped through some basic garbage matting. The question comes, when do you actually need to do rotoscoping? And one of those is an example here. This is fairly typical where you have a background. You actually want to keep most of the background, but you want to add something into the scene, possibly behind some of the things within the scene. And so let's just take a look at something. If we had our giant walking back here, and this could be a CG creature or anything else we want to place back here, of course, when we shot the blue screen or green screen, I could have put in a green card right here when we shot it, so the only visible image would be this section of the man. And sometimes you can do that. You can place something in the green screen that will allow you to match up with the live action. But most of the time you're dealing with very tricky edges, and trying to get that all lined up and working is more difficult than it's worth. So it's better to actually do it as a rotoscope. In this case, if it's lock-off, it's a single frame rotoscope. Let me just go ahead and do the composite here so you can see. I've already created the mat along this edge. And so now, in this case, our giant's able to walk from behind this building. Now, if this is a static frame, it's still, a non-moving camera, locked-off camera, I could have done this actually in Photoshop, creating an alpha channel, and brought that into my compositing program and used that. If this were a panning shot or moving camera shot, what I'd have to do is move my mat frame by frame, or at least on keyframes as the camera moves, and that would match this edge. And I'll get into the details of how I actually created that. But the idea is you want to be able to add something in the midground, then rotoscope becomes very worthwhile. Okay, so now we have an example. If we want to go ahead and add a painted killer whale in between a background and a foreground actor, one way that we could achieve this would be to go ahead and shoot the background by itself, and then we would go ahead and shoot the foreground actor against green screen, and then we could go ahead and create or shoot a painted killer whale and combine those together all as one. So now we've got the background, the killer whale, and then our blue screen or green screen foreground actor. Well, that can be done, but the big problem here is we have to spend more time shooting this additional element in front of a background. We've got to make sure the lighting matches, we have shadows, we have all the interaction and other things to deal with. So the main thing that we want to do is take a look at an alternative to that, and that alternative is to use rotoscoping. Let's take to another example here. So here we can see, let's go back and take a look at the pieces. Here we photograph both the background and the actor all as one piece. So we get natural motion blur, we've got all the lighting matches, the shadows, everything works together. And in fact, the only thing that we'll be adding will be the killer whale. So we stick the killer whale in there. Now how do we get our actor actually in front of the killer whale just in this one section? Of course, we can go ahead and just rotoscope. We could go ahead and rotoscope just a portion of him if we knew that the killer whale didn't go in front of his legs or other sections of his body. And this is essentially what we did for all of Dragonheart. There's no blue screen whatsoever in Dragonheart. We have Dennis Quaid. We actually shot him on location, so that enabled us to photograph him in the real environment with the real lighting. The other big advantage is I can do any camera move I want and go ahead and rotoscope and just use motion trackers to handle the 3D object that we'll be adding in. So that presents a much cleaner, much nicer looking composite as compared to having to shoot a whole nother element such as a green screen of this person walking and trying to composite that on top. So that's one of the main areas that you'd want to take a look at doing rotoscoping with. Another use for rotoscoping is to create something like twins, or in this case, triplets. Uh, by shooting with a locked off camera and by shooting the actor multiple times, we can go ahead and split this and create multiple images of that same character. In this case, it wasn't shot as to be a twin shot, so I've just offset the frame. So let's take a quick look at what's involved here. So here's the actual shot towards the end of the shot, and then I chose an earlier frame and then an even earlier frame. Just offset these and layered them on top of each other. And if I take a look here, this is a roto spline, and I'll go to I've created here, just creating some spline shapes, and once again, a lot of just basic editorial equipment or software allows you to do this with 4 points or with 8-point splines. And the idea is that you set the points at one frame and then set it at like the end frame, and then it animates between those. And you can also set midpoints as well if you want to change the shape or size a little bit as need be. Now if we look at actually the shot, there's some frames here where things start to overrun. We can see some clipping of one actor over the other, or as it were the same actor. You can see his legs being cut off. So I would have to bring up that particular one, and let's just see if we can get to that frame and make some adjustments as need be. Okay. So as you can see, I'm able to adjust that. And once again, the computer goes ahead and automatically takes care of the interpolating. And now I'm cutting off his foot here. So I'd go ahead and just move this 1 point over, and I can set these mats to feather as well, so that it doesn't become so obvious, but hopefully I've set things up in the brightness levels so that they match. Okay, so there you have it. Now if we were to have, and you can see that we've got another one, so I'd have to step through this just to make sure that each of these was done without causing problems to the next person in line. So that means I need to get them even tighter to avoid running over. Yeah, you can see it adjusting over here. But part of the problem is, as I get closer and closer to an overlap, that means I'm going to have to do a tighter rotoscope or mat around. In this case, if his foot went behind or in front of the other foot of the twin, or if you wanted one twin to walk in front of the other, then you would definitely have to do what we call an articulate roto, where you'd have to do it around every really tight around his body. And I'll get into some of those details in just a moment. But you can also see the power of the splines, and I'll show more of that here in a moment. But the idea is that with the digital technology, you're able to go ahead and just create moving lines and keyframe it, and then the computer is able to move it throughout. If we were to paint each of these mats, and in this case they're kind of soft garbage mats, so it's not as critical, but if we were to try to do articulate mats and paint them frame by frame, then you would tend to get some chatter, some jittering. If you look at some old movies that had hand painted mats, you can sometimes see the edges jump around a bit. Of course, one of the other things that you can do with rotoscoping is to isolate certain areas. If you remember a film from a few years ago called Pleasantville, where they had colorized or kept certain areas in color and certain areas in black and white. And, this has been used on other types of things. So in this case, I've gone ahead and isolated our foreground actor with the rotoscope. And now I've changed our background into a black and white. So I'm able to manipulate the foreground background totally independently now that I've created a mat for this. I essentially have two layers. I have the same image on twice in the composite, and the top layer has the rotoscope, and I'm keeping normal. The background layer I'm manipulating. In this case, I'm removing the saturation to 0. And here I've turned it not only into black and white, but I've added quite a bit of blur to it. And likewise, the inverse could be true. I could be manipulating our foreground character, so he appeared different, in this case black and white, compared to our background. So another option with the rotoscoping is to select specific areas within frame to manipulate in different ways. One of the things that you can do with the roto splines is to create animated wipes for special effects. In this case, we're seeing somebody wipe on through multiple roto splines. Now, part of this is similar to how they did like Ghost, where they walk through the walls and so forth. An animator would essentially animate a matte and create a matte based on the depth. And if you're doing this type of work, sometimes it helps to project a slit light along the edge of your actor so you can actually see him go through and use that as a guide for your animators. They also did something similar on Van Helsing, where they walked through the mirror itself. And in this case, I would animate these a little bit different if it looked like he was going through a solid object. This was primarily to show some different ways or different types of manipulation that you can do. Well, that concludes this portion of the podcast on rotoscoping. I'll cover the actual techniques in the next podcast. Thank you for watching.